everyone, and welcome to another monthly reads video. Now, with the new series of Wheel of Time coming out soon, I decided that I would read the next book in the series. Now, I read the first one just after the first series came out, and I got this one quite quickly after and was supposed to start reading it, but then was really busy reading other things and ended up not reading it. Then I thought, oh, season 2 is coming out pretty soon, so I should probably get round to reading this. And as with the first one, it didn't disappoint. I really enjoyed it. I felt like the story went at a good pace, and I like the fact that we sort of kind of got a little bit of background for each of the characters to sort of like catch us up a bit, but it didn't sort of spend ages catching us up on things. It just kind of gave us a little bit more explanation rather than just assuming we remembered what happened. You know, so sort of like, rather than going, oh, this is what happened and this is what happened, they just sort of like, when a character mentions something, they give a little bit more explanation, and that was nice to kind of have that happening in it. And it was nice to sort of see where the characters have been, not sort of catch up with them right away, but have like a small amount of time pass between the end of the last book and when this book starts. Now, the plot of this book I felt was a lot more compact to the last one. I felt like you weren't quite sure where the journey was going and where they were going to end up by the end of the book in the last one, whereas I felt like it was a little bit more sort of explained where the sort of end point was going to be for this one. And I felt like everything was a little bit more compact. Everybody was more sort of on the same journey very much to begin with, and the conclusion to the story was arrived at much quicker. But this by no means took away from the novel. Like, this is one of those things I've come to expect of like the more sort of middle or second books that come in fantasy series, where it's not necessarily filler, but it's something that has to happen, but it's something that takes a lot less time than the sort of the big long-winded ones where we've got lots of stuff to learn. I feel like it put in a lot of ideas which we're going to see happening later, and I definitely feel that after reading this I'm probably going to have to have read the third book by the time the series starts, and which I might try and do that. I don't know. I probably won't get round to reading the third book by the time the series starts, but hopefully I will try and read that while the second series is on, and then, because I definitely feel like they're going to have to take stuff from the third book as well as this book to sort of like fill out the series, because I definitely feel like this could be done in quite a short series. So yeah, definitely enjoyed this one, definitely ready to move on to the next one. I felt like that we spent a good amount of time with each of the characters, and that was nice. Maybe some of them could have done with having a little bit more time, but I feel like their time is going to come later on and it'll be nice to learn. There's definitely a couple of things where you sort of know more information than the characters, and that was quite fun. You were like, oh, don't trust this person, no, don't let that person do that, because sort of like you knew who they were and the characters didn't, because you have information that they don't have, and it will be interesting when they find out the rest of that information. Okay, so unlike in the first one, where they're just sort of like following Moraine and they don't really sort of know what's going on and they're all a bit panicked, in this one obviously the horn has been stolen and they need to go after the horn, and that's primarily what all of the boys are doing. They're going on the hunt for the horn. So the girls are starting their lessons in how to use their powers and become novices, and they sort of have their own little adventure where they end up meeting back up with the boys. And obviously this is why the plot sort of seems to be a lot more compact, is because it's all based around this search for the horn. And even though the girls aren't helping with that, they do end up getting dragged into it, and obviously the horn is lost. Obviously by the end they find the horn, spoiler, you know. but it's kind of what happens when they find the horn and the situation they're in when they find the horn, and this obviously sets everything up for the next book. So what I liked about this book is it had quite a fast pace. Normally for a book this size you'd think that the pace would be quite slow, but obviously with it being the second book in the series, it doesn't have to do a lot of world building, so that means like every single page is literally just adventure. It's literally the quest that they're going on, the description of the places that they end up, but you already have a rough idea of these places because of what was in the first book, and I thought that was quite interesting that, you know, although this book looks huge, it kind of isn't. It's really all just like the fact that you have to take pages to explain them doing an ambush on a camp in the dark, and that's literally what it is. It's not world building, it's not them going to thousands of different places. It literally is a really short space of time that they're on this hunt, but then in the middle there's this big time jump thing, which is a little bit of a spoiler, where they sort of catch up with what's going on 4 months later because something happens, and they're kind of not around for 4 months, the boys aren't. They're just, whereas the girls are just doing their learning in that time, and so there's a big jump of time in the middle, but the actual amount of time that passes for this book in terms of actual action happening is really quite short, unlike with some fantasy series that are this big and chunky, you know, like years are happening, you know, months are passing, we're finding out what hundreds of different people are up to in that time, whereas this is just a small group of people going on a quest for one thing across the country and then having a little time jump happening. So the big plot points in this that I was actually quite shocked about are the fact that we felt like it was going to be ages before we found out who the Dragon Reborn was, but it's kind of, this book they just stay at the beginning. Rand is the Dragon Reborn, and sorry if that's a spoiler to anybody, it was kind of obvious, and they didn't linger with it. They decided to just go, yes, Rand is the Dragon Reborn, he's got to come to terms with that, and surprisingly he comes to terms with it quite quickly. I didn't imagine that by the end of the book he'd be like, okay, fine, yeah, I'm the Dragon Reborn. But, you know, it's an interesting path and an interesting journey that he goes on, and this book definitely is his book. It's definitely his quest that this focuses on, which gives me a bit of hope that maybe in the other books we're going to focus on some of the other characters a little bit more, and that's what keeps the series going. Obviously this is such a big famous fantasy series, but going into it I don't really have much of an idea, just what I've seen on the series and what I've read in the first book. I decided not to read too much into it before actually going on this journey of reading these books, so I don't know where it ends. You know, like some people would be like, oh, how do you know what it, how do you not know how it ends and things like that. Well, no, I'm just going along for the ride, and I'm going to enjoy the ride, and it's going in a direction that I didn't expect it to go in, but for such a lot of books, like there's 13 of these I think. Let's double check how many there are. There's 14 of these, so for 14 books, you know, how are they gonna keep this series going? And I kind of can see how they would do that, you know. It ends on quite a satisfying note, actually. I've read a lot of fantasy series and they end in quite an unsatisfying way, but this ended in quite an open-ended way, but it also gave a very good conclusion to the actual plot of this book. So obviously they find the horn, that is how it ends, and they all end up meeting up together again and then going their separate ways again. And so it was quite nice to have that like final moment of everyone's back together again, but now we're gonna split up again. And it just felt like a nice, like, I don't desperately need to know what happens next. Like, if the new series weren't coming out so soon, I'd probably be like, yeah, I can leave it for a bit before finding out what happens next. But at the same token, I'm like, oh, I would like to know what happens next, you know? So it's just got that right balance of, I'm not desperate that I'm gonna like read it all and then be like, what do I do now? But I am intrigued to know what happens next, so I think that's a good balance. The writing style itself is what you would expect for a novel that was written at this time. Obviously fantasy from different time periods has a sort of a style to it that you can sort of tell. So it's not quite your sort of modern style that you get now, but it's not your really old style. And it doesn't quite fit into that 80s fantasy style that I've read a couple of books from that period, and it sort of is in between what we would get in modern fantasy and how sort of like 80s fantasy is written, which I think is about right, because this was written in the 90s, so you can see that it definitely has elements of that sort of very classic 80s fantasy vibe, but it sort of is starting to move into the more modern style. So yeah, definitely if you aren't a huge fan of more modern fantasy, but you don't like really old fantasy, then this might be something for you to give a go if you have never had a go at sort of more 80s and 90s fantasy novels. If you like fantasy, then obviously this is a must read. You know, it's the Wheel of Time. It's always going to be on one of those top 10 lists of fantasy novels, and it definitely deserves to be there. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this book. Thank you for watching this video, and please comment below what you thought if you've read the Wheel of Time books. You know, no spoilers though for what I've got to come, you know. And yeah, thanks for watching the video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye!